Imagine being so rich you could bankroll the rise of Julius Caesar, buy entire armies, and own a huge chunk of Rome itself. Imagine your personal fortune being so vast that it was compared to the entire annual state budget of the Roman Republic. Now, imagine it wasn't enough. That was Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Roman history. But his insatiable greed wasn't for money, it was for glory. This hunger would lead him into the heart of a hostile desert, to a legendary death where his enemies would finally give him what he craved, in the most brutal way imaginable, by pouring molten gold down his throat. This is the story of how infinite ambition destroyed Rome's richest man. To understand a man who would risk it all for a taste of glory, you have to understand the world that forged him. Marcus Crassus was born in 115 BC into a Rome that was tearing itself apart. The late Republic was a brutal arena where ambition was measured in blood and betrayal. Crassus's own family became a casualty of this chaos. During the civil wars between the generals Marius and Sulla, his father and brother were murdered in political purges. A young Marcus was forced to run for his life, escaping to what is now modern-day Spain. For 8 months, he hid in a cave, kept alive by a friend, watching from afar as his family name was disgraced and his inheritance stolen. It was in that darkness, in that moment of total powerlessness, that the seeds of his obsession were sown. He developed a deep-seated fear of poverty and a burning desire for the security that only immense wealth could bring. But more than that, he learned the fundamental lesson of his time. In Rome, power was the only real shield, and power grew from 2 things: money and military victory. When the political winds changed and the general Sulla marched on Rome to take over, Crassus spotted his chance. He came out of exile, raised a small army with his local connections, and joined Sulla's cause. He proved to be a capable, if ruthless, commander. And at the decisive Battle of the Colline Gate in 82 BC, where Sulla cemented his control, Crassus made a name for himself on the battlefield, playing a key role in the victory. He had survived. He had returned a victor. And now, with Sulla as the absolute dictator of Rome, Crassus was perfectly placed to build the first great pillar of his power, his fortune. With Sulla in charge, Rome was introduced to the proscriptions, state-sanctioned hit lists. The names of Sulla's enemies were posted in the forum, and these men were declared outlaws. Anyone could kill them without consequence, and most importantly for Crassus, their property was seized and auctioned off by the state. It was a vulture's feast, and Crassus was the hungriest of them all. He swooped in, buying up the sprawling estates and valuable lands of the condemned for pennies on the dollar. He had an eye for value and the cold-blooded resolve to profit from others' misery. As the historian Plutarch noted, the public calamities became his greatest source of revenue. But it was his genius in the Roman real estate market that truly became legendary. Rome was a chaotic city of wood and brick, dangerously prone to fires. Where others saw disaster, Crassus saw a business model. He created something totally unheard of: Rome's first private fire brigade. It consisted of over 500 slaves, trained not just to fight fires but also as builders and architects. The operation was a masterclass in predatory opportunism. When a building caught fire, Crassus's brigade would rush to the scene. But they wouldn't throw a single drop of water. Instead, Crassus's agents would find the panicked owner and make a ridiculously low offer to buy the burning building, and sometimes the threatened ones next to it. The negotiation was simple. If the owner refused, Crassus ordered his brigade to stand down and let it all burn. If they agreed, the deal was done, and only then would the firefighters spring into action to save what was now Crassus's new asset. He'd then use his slave architects to renovate the property or build a new, more profitable apartment block in its place. Through this ruthless scheme, it was said Crassus came to own a vast portion of Rome. He also invested in silver mines and slave trafficking, but real estate was his empire's core. By the 60s BC, his fortune was astronomical. The historian Pliny estimated it at 200 million sesterces, a figure that rivaled the entire annual budget of the Roman Republic. Plutarch claims his wealth grew from under 300 talents to over 7,100. Crassus himself used to say that no man could be called rich unless he could afford to maintain an entire legion from his own income. By that standard, he was maybe the only truly rich man in Rome. He had built his first pillar of power. He was Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest man in Rome. But as he'd soon find out, all the gold in the world couldn't buy him the one thing he wanted most. In the rigid social hierarchy of Rome, wealth bought influence, but it didn't command ultimate respect. Dignitas, a mix of honor and public standing, was the real currency of the elite. And the highest form of dignitas wasn't earned in the marketplace. It was won on the battlefield through military glory. This was the source of Crassus's deepest insecurity. His one major military achievement was crushing the slave rebellion led by Spartacus in 71 BC. But while this was a vital service to Rome, defeating an army of slaves wasn't seen as a source of high honor. It was pest control, not glorious conquest. To add insult to injury, his rival, Pompey the Great, showed up at the very end, mopped up a few thousand survivors, and managed to steal a huge share of the credit, being granted a magnificent triumph, Rome's highest military honor. Crassus got a lesser celebration. The slight stung him badly and fueled the bitter rivalry. He looked at his peers and saw his own legacy fading. There was Pompey, already called the Great, for his victories in the East. And then there was the charismatic rising star, Gaius Julius Caesar, who was proving to be a military genius in his conquest of Gaul. Crassus was the money. Pompey was the established general. Caesar was the brilliant up-and-comer. Each man was a titan, but none was powerful enough to rule alone. So, in 60 BC, in a move of pure political pragmatism, these three rivals formed a secret alliance, the First Triumvirate. It was an informal pact to pool their influence and ambitions to control the Roman state. Crassus was the financier. His immense wealth bankrolled Caesar's political campaigns. In return, his partners pushed through laws that benefited him. For a time, this three-headed monster ruled Rome. But for Crassus, the alliance just made him feel like the odd man out. He was the one counting coins while his partners were out conquering new lands. He had funded Caesar's rise and now watched as Caesar's fame eclipsed his own. He was getting old, approaching his 60s. Time was running out. He needed a war. A conquest so grand it would silence all whispers of him being just a moneylender. His eyes turned east to the one great, unconquered power on the edge of Roman influence, the Parthian Empire. The Parthian Empire was a formidable power stretching across modern-day Iran and Mesopotamia. It was fabulously wealthy, controlling a key part of the Silk Road. For a man seeking both riches and glory, Parthia was the ultimate prize. To Crassus, it seemed like an easy win. Roman legions had a long history of crushing Eastern armies, and he figured this would be no different. Through the triumvirate's political maneuvering, Crassus secured a 5-year term as governor of Syria, a strategic launchpad for his invasion. This was to be Crassus's private war, an unprovoked attack driven entirely by his personal ambition. The Senate hadn't even authorized it. As he prepared to leave Rome in 55 BC, the mood was grim. Many Romans openly opposed the campaign. One official, Aetius Capito, even performed a terrifying public ritual, lighting a ceremonial fire and chanting ancient curses, calling on the gods to bring ruin upon Crassus and his army. The scene sent a chill through the city, but Crassus, blinded by ambition, ignored it. Once in Syria, he used his personal fortune to raise 7 legions, a massive force of around 35,000 heavy infantry, plus thousands of cavalry and light infantry. It was a huge, powerful Roman army, and Crassus was supremely confident. His confidence bred arrogance. King Artavasd of Armenia, a Roman ally, visited Crassus and offered sound advice: invade Parthia through the mountains of Armenia. It was a longer route, but it would shield the legions from the Parthians' greatest weapon, their cavalry. The king even offered to add tens of thousands of his own soldiers. Crassus flatly dismissed the offer. He was a Roman, and he would march the direct route, straight across the open plains of Mesopotamia. A Parthian envoy arrived and asked why Rome was invading. Crassus arrogantly boasted he'd give his answer in their capital. The envoy just laughed, held up his palm, and said, "O Crassus, hair will grow here before you ever see Seleucia." Worse, Crassus put his faith in a local chieftain named Arianes, who promised to be a loyal guide but was actually a paid Parthian agent. His mission was to lead the Romans away from the Euphrates River and deep into the most desolate, waterless part of the desert, straight into a trap. Crassus, ignoring his own officers' warnings, trusted him completely. And so, in the late spring of 53 BC, he marched his army of over 40,000 men into a sea of sand, under a blazing sun, marching blindly toward his doom. The landscape near the town of Carrhae was a featureless, sun-scorched plain. The heat was suffocating. Roman scouts galloped back in a panic. The enemy was upon them. Crassus, gripped by a sudden fear of being outflanked, ordered his legions into a massive, hollow defensive square. It was a fortress of flesh, slow and cumbersome, just waiting to be besieged. Then, the Parthians appeared. At first, they seemed like a small, unimpressive force. But a terrifying sound filled the air, the deep, booming rhythm of huge kettle drums. On that signal, the horsemen threw off their cloaks, revealing gleaming armor. The sun glinted off 1,000 cataphracts, elite heavy cavalry, with both horse and rider encased in steel, wielding massive lances. But the real danger came from the other 9,000 soldiers, the horse archers. They swarmed around the static Roman square, staying just out of javelin range. And then the arrows began to fall. It was a relentless storm of steel-tipped death. The Romans formed their famous testudo, or tortoise formation, but the arrows were so powerful they punched straight through their shields. Other arrows, fired in high arcs, found faces, hands, and legs. The Romans were a stationary target, their strength in close-quarters combat completely neutralized. Crassus prayed the Parthians would run out of arrows. But their general, a brilliant nobleman known as Surina, had a supply train of camels loaded with nothing but arrows. There would be no end to the storm. Desperate, Crassus ordered his son, Publius, to charge with his 1,000 elite Gallic cavalry. The Parthians immediately feigned a retreat, luring the Gauls into a chase far from the main army. Once separated, the horse archers turned in their saddles, the legendary Parthian shot, and fired devastating volleys, while the cataphracts slammed into the Gallic charge. The fight was a massacre. Publius, wounded and seeing no escape, ordered his shield-bearer to kill him. Back at the square, Crassus held a flicker of hope. That hope was gruesomely extinguished. The Parthians returned, and leading them was a soldier holding a long spear. Impaled on the tip was the severed head of Publius Crassus. They paraded it before the Roman lines, mockingly asking his father if he recognized the young man. The sight broke Marcus Crassus. His spirit was crushed. He rode along the ranks, telling his men to fight on for their own survival, that his own loss was personal. But his words were hollow. The soldiers saw the terror in his eyes. The arrow storm resumed and continued until nightfall finally brought a temporary pause. That night, the Roman camp was a vision of hell. Crassus was catatonic with grief, forcing his officers to order a desperate retreat to the nearby town of Carrhae, leaving 4,000 wounded men behind. When morning came, the Parthians descended on the camp and slaughtered every last one of them. The retreat was a nightmare, and the army was shattered. Seeing the Romans slipping away, Surinna devised one last trick. He offered a truce and safe passage. Crassus didn't trust it, but his own troops, on the verge of mutiny, threatened to kill him if he didn't go. He had no choice. He rode out to meet Surinna between the armies. It was a trap. The Parthians offered Crassus a horse, and as they tried to hoist him onto it, a scuffle broke out. Swords were drawn. In the brawl, Crassus and all of his officers were cut down and killed. What happened next became a timeless legend. The historian Cassius Dio writes that the Parthians, to mock the infamous avarice of Rome's richest man, gave him what he always seemed to want. They held open the mouth of his severed head and poured in molten gold. "Sate your thirst for gold," they reportedly jeered. While modern historians debate if this literally happened, Plutarch gives a different account where Crassus's head was used as a stage prop in a play. The symbolic power of the story is undeniable. It was the perfect, macabre ending for a man who had everything and still wanted more. The Battle of Carrhae was one of the worst defeats in Roman history. An estimated 20,000 Romans were killed and another 10,000 captured. The captured legionary standards became trophies for the Parthians, a source of deep and lasting humiliation for Rome. But the biggest consequence of Crassus's death was the political vacuum it left in Rome. The first triumvirate was like a three-legged stool. With Crassus gone, a leg was kicked out. He had been the buffer between the towering ambitions of Pompey and Caesar. With his death, that balance shattered. The rivalry between Pompey and Caesar spiraled out of control, and within 4 years, Caesar would cross the Rubicon, plunging the Republic into a civil war that led to Pompey's death, Caesar's dictatorship, and the final collapse of the Roman Republic. The story of Marcus Crassus is more than a history lesson, it's a brutal, timeless cautionary tale. He gained the world but lost everything that mattered. He built a fortune that could rival empires, yet he died in a dusty wasteland, a broken and humiliated man. His life is a stark reminder that some things, like honor and true glory, can never be bought. An ambition without limits leads only to ruin. Crassus wanted a legacy that would echo through the ages. He got one. Not for the glory he craved, but as the man whose thirst was finally quenched with molten gold. If you enjoy stories from the ancient world like this one, make sure you're subscribed and hit the notification bell. We dive into the most dramatic tales of power, ambition, and betrayal from history. Let us know in the comments which historical figures' epic rise and fall we should cover next.